Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. This week we're reviewing the latest movie from former Filibuster guest Edgar Wright. We've definitely got to mention that in there. The Last Night in Soho. And as always, joining me is the 1960s to my 2010s, Dallas King. How are you?
Groovy, baby, yeah.
Yeah, like that's nice. That's a nice throwback to the 90s as well. So we've got like something nicely in the middle there.
Yeah.
So for those that haven't seen The Last Night in Soho, a young girl, passionate about fashion design, is mysteriously able to enter the 1960s where she encounters her idol, a dazzling wannabe singer. But 1960s London is not all what it seems, and time seems to be falling apart with shady consequences. So before we dive into the film, I want to get your take on Edgar Wright, and are you a fan of his work?
Oh, I'm a huge fan. I mean, have we dedicated an episode to him? I'm sure we have at some point. I think we must have, yeah. But it has been a while, since we've had anything from him. I think it was, Baby Driver was his last feature, and that was probably about 4 years ago. And unfortunately, as well made a film as it is, it has become slightly cursed in terms of cast members, particularly Ansel Elgort and then Kevin Spacey as well. So it's not one which I don't think many people are revisiting as maybe as often as his other works. But I mean, it's safe to say everything from Spaced through to The World's End, I'm a huge fan of. Scott Pilgrim's still, I think, his best film. I know I'm slightly controversial in saying that The World's End is my favourite of the Cornetto trilogy, but I think that's just because I'm slightly older and probably more at the stage of life that Gary King and that were when going on the Golden Mile. But yeah, no, it's been a big year. He's been away, but now he's back. As fortune would have it, 2 films out this year between the Sparks Brothers documentary and this. And I think it's fair to say that this year and his film output marks a bit of a departure or evolution, perhaps, in terms of the filmmaking of Edgar Wright. Would that be fair to say, you think?
I think so to an extent. I mean, it's almost one of those ones. I'll kind of dive into it, with that, where you almost think of it like, oh yeah, this is ground that he's like covered already, something very British and something kind of, even though you think of Shaun of the Dead, I almost think of like, oh, it's a horror, it's zombies, etc. like that. But this very much kind of leans into something very different. It sort of seems since he's left kind of the Cornetto trilogy behind, he's sort of been really leaning into sort of serious genre movies. It might be comedic at times, but they're not comedy movies. They're not co-written by him and Simon Pegg. Sometimes they're on his own, or sometimes in this case, the female scriptwriter from 1917, a fellow Scot, I should add as well. So yeah, it definitely feels like it's growing up more Edgar Wright, but I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing. I'm going to pull it back a little bit, because what were your expectations for The Last Night in Soho? Because obviously you caught it after me at the screening, after I caught it at a screening at the London Film Festival, which certainly left audiences mixed. It was one of those ones, if you had social media and people had FOMO about maybe missing out on Last Night in Soho, the Twitter reaction definitely seemed to lean into it being a bit of a potential disappointment, or certainly not a universal film like a lot of his work is.
Yeah, no, I think it had its world premiere at Venice, and sort of trailing the festival circuit. I think, the reviews were kind of muted or mixed, would probably be the kindest way to say about it. There was a few sort of 4 stars out there, but there was also a few of this is Wright's worst film, and so I mean, going into it, it's like the premise sounded fantastic. Obviously anything with Anya Taylor-Joy at the moment, definitely marks a box for me. The first trailer was fantastic. I think with the haunting use of Anya Taylor-Joy singing Downtown. I never watched the second trailer. I know that was one that Edgar Wright was sort of saying that, if you want to go in cold, trying to avoid the second trailer. It's always interesting when filmmakers seem to be battling the marketing departments in terms of the material that's released. And like, ideally, he would have probably gone with something a bit more mysterious as to what was going on. It's safe to say probably that wasn't the film that maybe I was expecting, but yeah, I had thoughts about it. What about yourself? I mean, what was it like going into that press screening, and then what were the chats like afterwards in the queue for the next one?
Yeah, I was looking forward to it. I knew Edgar Wright movies always something to look forward to. While I wasn't a big fan of Baby Driver, I did enjoy the Sparks Brothers documentary, and I did have a few issues potentially with it, but it was overall a pretty enjoyable movie. But I was looking forward to this one. It feels like a long time ago we got the kind of trailer and expected almost October last year, and it was one of those ones. It was a trailer. I'm a sucker for like a cover song in a trailer, and I thought Anya Taylor-Joy's cover of Downtown, it was quite evocative, and I think I said the same to you at the time, where it's like, oh, this is going to be exciting. I bet they'll do this at like London Film Fest or something, and it would be good to go explore the locations afterwards. But I went in quite excited. It was a weekend double bill almost of Last Night in Soho on the Saturday, French Dispatch the Sunday, to really anticipate films from filmmakers that I really like and admire, and both kind of left me a little bit disappointed. And I think the problem I had, I'm watching this movie only like meters away from Soho itself, and it was quite surreal thinking, oh, I walked through that street to come here, or I recognise that spot, or I've been to that pub, all these sorts of things. That's fine enough, but when you're watching a film for the first time, it maybe says something about your level of engagement with the story, the performances. If you're like, oh, that's that cinema just around the corner, that's that. Like, I was more thinking about the locations than much else, which was a bit of a problem, I think.
Yeah, no, it is a problem when something like that sort of takes you out of the film. And I know that sort of watching the film, it's difficult to decide if this is a compliment or a criticism. But for me, it felt like the least Edgar Wright film. I know there's quite a few of his, sort of trademark sort of jump cuts, crash cuts, unusual transitions, particularly like on Eloise's journey into London, whether it's sort of getting packed or getting on the train and stuff like that. But once she sort of arrives, it becomes her journey, and it becomes a much more sort of straightforward, almost mute in terms of the direction and stuff, in order to let the story play out. And I can understand that he's wanting to grow as a filmmaker. It's also good, I think, for a story like this, that you're not being distracted by, oh, there's Simon Pegg, or there's Nick Frost, there's Michael Smiley, the usual sort of canon of characters. So it's I can see why he would to do that, but I think for me, it had sort of like a great sort of first. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the third act as where it lost them, and I can certainly see why. I could see where it was going around about the library scene, which is probably one of the scariest library scenes since Ghostbusters in 1994. But I really was sort of enjoying it. The sort of, I mean, music has always been hugely important to Edgar Wright's movies in terms of using to choreograph action or for comedic effect, and something like "Don't Stop Me Now" in Queen, or even just to sort of hint and tell at the story. A lot of The World's End, the plot is sort of almost telegraphed by the songs that are being used. So when they go back into the sort of 90s disco, they've got Kylie Minogue's "Step Back in Time" playing when they're being encouraged to basically give themselves over and go back to their younger selves and stuff like that. So it's always very important, and the sort of the 60s music sort of helps create that vibe, and also basically becomes the portal in which she goes back in time in the first place. She's listening to the Cilla Black song in bed, she falls asleep, and then she sort of wakes up in going into the Café de Paris, which is apparently under the Empire Haymarket cinema and not under a different cinema, because it's on a different street, but for dramatic license they had to move it. But fair enough. And for me, that was probably the highlight of the film, was that opening sequence where she goes back to the 60s, just because I'm a huge fan of old school movie magic, and I really loved the way that he pulled that off with sort of Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy's characters becoming linked and you could see them reacting to each other via the mirror. But of course, there's no mirror there. They're actually just doing, reacting to each other. And even had like the Phelps twins from Harry Potter. They were both playing the maitre d', so it allowed them to act. And then also using the choreography in that dance sequence where he would sort of do camera moves where one would come out of shot and then the next one would move in seamlessly. So that whole sort of sequence, it was just a joy to watch. And yeah, maybe nothing sort of was able to live up to that moment as the timelines become sort of increasingly sort of overlapped and things go back and forth over the timeline. I mean, what did you make of the central concept of her being able to go back? Because it's hinted that she's got a connection to the past, or to, she can almost see dead people, like Sixth Sense. This isn't a spoiler; it's covered in like the last 5 minutes, in the first 5 minutes, sorry, where she sees her mother in the mirror. So it's hinted that she has a sort of Sixth Sense or something like that. I mean, what did you make of the concept, which is kind of like Midnight in Paris meets Repulsion, I guess?
It's one of those ones, it feels like in the beginning it's setting up that she can see her dead mother as something that's going to be potentially explored, or like some sort of connection, but it's just that she kind of sees dead people. It didn't feel really like, I'm fine with things not being explained and being ambiguous, but with that it just felt like I couldn't quite see how it all kind of fitted together. And I think it was almost those first few minutes, as silly as it sounds, where I saw some sort of warning signs where I like Tomlinson Mackenzie. I think good actress, she's been in good things, but I was not buying her Cornish accent, and that took a little while to settle into. I think when at the beginning it felt a little bit all over the place, and then it felt like she settled into an accent. I'm not saying it was a Cornish one that she had, but it felt like it settled into something as opposed to being a bit all over the place. And I'm just hearing the accent, and sometimes it's where, I've said it before, sometimes how a font or a credit that's used in a film worked, and I was just like, oh, this font doesn't feel quite right. And
are you meaning the title font? I was like, that's an odd choice for a title font for this type of movie, which was billed as like a giallo thriller sort of thing. Yeah, it was. It's kind of hinted at like almost like a romantic comedy coming of age film, rather than a horror thriller.
Yeah, exactly. There was little things like that where you're just like, oh, this isn't kind of quite working for me. And it was interesting, I know a lot's been made of it, where Edgar Wright had spoken, where he's like, I don't want people to go and like, we will touch about like the end of the movie at the end of the podcast and all that sort of stuff as a separate thing, because it has to be discussed. But like, ours had a written letter before the film of like, hey, don't spoil the film for people. It's one of these ones, we want people to go along on sort of these dark nights that we're having just now in the UK and enjoy the film, etc. But then
I didn't get a written letter. I'm disappointed.
No? Yeah, well, I think he put a tweet out, I think, or something like that for after the fact. But I think he was just like, hey, for any of the reviews, try not to mention the end of the movie, etc., or the twist or anything. But you're like, the whole plot of the film is very much laid out in the trailer, and I was kind of watching it going, it dives very quickly into that 1960s world. And I was the same as you. Like, the best part of the last night in Soho was that YouTube video someone put up where it showed you how they did the spinning, dancing, etc. I love that stuff. And Edgar Wright was the reason I upgraded from a DVD to a Blu-ray player, because I love the documentaries on the Cornetto trilogy, and you couldn't get it on the DVD of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but you could the Blu-ray. I love when Edgar Wright like lets us into his movie making world, and I will definitely buy Last Night in Soho eventually to get some of those materials, because I thought he did a really interesting job kind of bringing that period to life. But I just felt it was let down by the plot. I felt like it was very predictable where it was going and who was going to be all involved, etc. And I just found it to be unfortunately quite a messy film, where I just think even some of them, like, there's just even things where like quite early on we're introduced to this bully character, and you're automatically, rightly or wrongly, as an audience member, expecting like she's going to get her comeuppance at some point, but she doesn't. She's just there. Like, you feel like, oh, she is going to get it, something is going to happen terrible to her, but nothing ever kind of happens. There's just little weird things like that, much like the mom at the beginning, where you're like, okay, there's ideas here that don't feel fully fleshed out and just ultimately feel let down.
Yeah, no, I think the sort of bitchy sort of fellow pupils, roommates sort of thing, it's, I guess it's there to provide the plot point of why she moves out of student halls into this particular bed set. But beyond that, it didn't really add anything to it. And I think, yeah, it kind of loses. They could have easily been sort of cut from like the second half of the film. You've got like the boyfriend plot. Again, that potentially could have been cut. I don't think it really adds anything to it other than providing like a Deus Ex Machina towards the end of how she's potentially going to get out of a situation. I think almost I would have liked more of her, a bit more agency. I think from both characters, Eloise and then from Sandy. I think we get these visions, and it's a conscious choice on Edgar Wright and Christy Wilson Cairns to basically have the fact that she cannot interact with, or she cannot change the past. She's able to get a glimpse or a window into the past. It's not like Midnight in Paris, where Owen Wilson was able to sit around and chat with like Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1920s Paris. She's looking at 60s London, but she's unable to do anything about it. So I would have liked to have seen a bit more agency about maybe potentially trying to find. I mean, there's this repeated line of where to find me and stuff like that, but she doesn't really go searching until about sort of 20, 30 minutes before the end. I just would have potentially liked to seen a bit more, maybe of a sort of detective style, sort of sleuthing around trying to find out a bit more about this character and stuff like that, because it does feel kind of rushed towards the end. And I know it's the thing that most people have issues with the film with. And I mean, can we talk about at this point about the Sandy's fate in the middle of the film, where it's safe to say that her dreams become a nightmare? Because I mean, that's sort of second act stuff, isn't it? So
Yeah, I think if you've come into this episode, there's you're going to be listening to a podcast like this. It's the film has been out like a week and a half by now. I think we can dive into it. So,
we'll put up a major spoiler warning when we talk about the third act. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk about. I think this is where a lot of people have been discussing the film, and it's about essentially. The character of Jack, who's played by Matt Smith, seems like a lovely guy. He's going to become her boyfriend. He's going to be her manager. He's going to get her a gig singing. But the club that she ends up working at is a club that is frequented by gentlemen who may be looking for more than just some on-stage entertainment from the girls. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. Like, it feels like the politics of sex work and stuff is very like. It feels like it's trying to say something, but it feels very superficial. And whether we should have the expectations a movie like this should be making a serious point or a developed point, it feels quite jarring. Whether that's because we have our preconceptions of what an Edgar Wright movie should be, or we've seen it sort of done better in sort of TV or film in the past few years, and it just didn't feel quite right to go into this world of sex work where, I know it's sort of drawn from, Soho being this mixture of, I think someone described it's the centre of the British film industry, but it's also a sex-like district. It's a place that you can go for a lovely meal, but it's also a place that you can buy your dildos and anal plugs, etc. Like, it's a weird kind of place, Soho, that makes it quite fun to walk around. But it was a very different world in the 1960s. But it just felt like there was maybe a more simpler and perhaps a safer story to tell there. And I don't think, I'm not advocating against, making edgy films, but that isn't what this film is. And if it's not going to have perhaps a strong message about these kind of vulnerable women, it's maybe not worth saying, because it just doesn't quite work. Where you think of some films where it's like female revenge against sexual predators, etc. It's done really well, but it can also equally be done disastrously wrong. And I just felt this film came up short in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the attempt to not sugarcoat, this golden age thinking of Soho in the 60s as being, this idealistic place, because, Soho is very much, I guess, like similar probably to like New York's Times Square, where, it does have a very seedy past, and you can dress it up all you want. You can, put up new lighting, you can build an M&M world, but, it can never maybe truly escape its past, and they're confronting that. I mean, I was almost expecting it to maybe have more parallels with modern day. I mean, I was expecting maybe Eloise to have been involved in something, because I'd heard some also talk about this part of the plot in advance of seeing it, and yeah, no, it's interesting. It tries to say something, but then I think it's the third act kind of fumbles the message in the end. Although it's interesting that I want to get your thoughts on this. That this film was rated an 18 in the UK, which was, for me, I thought quite extreme for what was on show. But in the BBFC, I saw a tweet saying that they were trying to claim that it lingered on bloody detail after an attack. But I was wondering if it was more linked to the sort of sex work aspect, because Ridley Scott's The Last Duel was also recently rated an 18, and that was, I think, down to the sort of sexual violence conduct. So I was wondering if they seem to be almost taking more of a stronger stance against that kind of violence, as opposed to sort of the blood and gore. So, because I mean, a lot of people were querying why it was an 18 rather than a 15, because they didn't think that the blood and gore really merited that rating. I mean, what did you think of the decision? Because it seems to have certainly hampered The Last Duel, and certainly I think it was the highest grossing new film at the box office this weekend, but it's still only grossed around about 714,000, which is really low, and I expect the 18 rating probably had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, it came, what, 8th at the box office, which is
behind June,
bad.
Bond, and a bunch of kids' films for the October halftime.
Yeah, the Harry Potter re-release, which I'm pretty sure every family has on DVD. I mean, the French Dispatch didn't do all that great. I think it was 500,000 that got as well. So it was a pretty bad week, but a competitive week, which is maybe a nice sign to see at the box office, because there's many worlds where we're still in pretty harsh lockdowns, and something like Last Night in Soho does really well. But when you see the numbers that No Time to Die, June, and these family movies are making, it shows that a diverse range of people are going to the box office, which is what we need for it to survive. So
the UKCA were saying that apparently it's the 5th weekend in a row that they've made 15 million. So they're saying cinema's back. It just seems to be that only certain films are doing very well, and unfortunately it seems to be the big studio franchises and kids films, which is potentially another death knell for original cinema, sadly.
As much as we want 18 rated films and so on, the reality is it's Halloween is always a difficult period to release into as well. Like, you with an audience like that, they are likely to be out drinking at the weekend or going to parties, etc. You might want a group of students that are going along, but some might be a bit older or younger than others. I think a 15 certificate would have seen it do quite well. It would have certainly have beaten Halloween Kills, for example. And an Edgar Wright film has an incredible kind of group of people that will go see those films and so on. But I think the timing ultimately killed it. I know that they wanted to release it in the dark nights, that you would go into the cinema in the dark, come out in the dark, and be surrounded by the lights, etc. But I just felt sort of tight. It just dropped at the wrong time. But it's one of these films that will do really well when it comes onto Blu-ray and DVD, as Edgar Wright movies always do. And we see it with Scott Pilgrim. I don't think Last Night in Soho is a Scott Pilgrim, but a Scott Pilgrim that's continuing to grow year on year. More people are finding it. Got re-released into the cinema. Last Night in Soho, I don't think will have that shelf life, but I think it will do fine when it gets to home video and Netflix, etc., and probably eventually ITV2.
Yeah, of course, it'll be a mainstay on ITV2. But I'm definitely keen to rewatch it. It's an odd one, because I came out feeling slightly I don't know, very mixed in my opinions, but sort of writing about it in my review, I ended up coming out, I think, slightly more positive than I thought. Once I sort of got, I mean, I appreciate what they were going for. I don't think it worked completely. It's certainly not flawless, but I still had a good time, but maybe not a great time, I think. But I guess that brings us on to the final act. So we'll throw up the big old spoiler warning, and then we can discuss the final act, because there's one performance particularly in the film that we haven't really talked about yet, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, Diane Rigg was great, wasn't she? Like, that was the tone of the movie I thought we were getting, where she feels like she's in on what this movie should be and what the best way to do it, whereas the others are taking it incredibly seriously, and that film isn't the best version of the film, where the film that sort of Diana Rigg is leaning into is maybe the film that we all thought we were kind of getting. I really did think that ending was unfortunate, because it's one of those things you're still kind of, I was on the fence a little bit, like, I wanted to like it, and I was pushing myself hard in the film to kind of go, I think this is good. It's maybe not the best, but it's good. But I think as it got to the end, it just all started to fall apart. Like we spoke about, there's a bit of a mystery at it, and what happened to Sandy, and it was one of those ones I felt quite obvious. I was like, Miss Collins is Sandy. Like, there's only like one other female character that's not this bitchy girl. Like, it's definitely clearly her, because why would you have this kind of landlady? And it just felt like it was destined to be that. Yeah, it's a slightly a bit more of a mystery about Jack, if we're generous, but Miss Collins, it felt incredibly signposted. If you've watched any cinema at all, when the revelation happened, you kind of roll your eyes a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think if you hadn't had suspicions beforehand, I think it's basically as soon as you say, you haven't drunk your tea, dear, it's like, if anyone offers you a drink in a movie like this, it's never going to be good. But yeah, so there's essentially the Eloise witnesses out in a vision what she believes is Jack killing Sandy. To the point where this is another bone of contention for a lot of people. This happens after a night out with her boyfriend, and who is a young black man. And Diana Rigg comes up after hearing screaming and basically accuses. A lot of people said that Eloise accused him of attempted rape, but it's clear from the film, from watching it, that she doesn't do that. She's reacting to the vision that she's seeing, and Diana Rigg sort of chases him off and stuff like that. And people thought it was a really sort of adding to the stereotypes of black men in sexual violence, and they didn't like it. But I think it's just a misreading of the scene. I mean, we're going to get onto a huge misreading of a scene when we talk about Eternals next week. Basically, a scene being taken out of context. But what it turns out is that Sandy actually killed Jack, and was actually then also killing off, it seems like, dozens of men, and then hiding their bodies in the floorboards and the walls of this bedsit. And what I couldn't figure out was, when she did this, did she kill Jack first, or was Jack, attacking her after he found out what she'd been doing with all the other men? It was difficult to figure that out, but I think that where the problem lied for me, it was almost this last minute switch from exploited to almost trying to be the sort of female empowerment sort of message. And yeah, I think it just came too late in the day. It felt, more of like, what a cool cheeky rug pull or twist, as opposed to, isn't this a cool message that we're sending to the women, that basically, if you're being beaten down by men, just take out your knife and slash the balls off.
Yeah, exactly. It just becomes messy. Even things like the house going on fire, it just felt like, and then these ghosts, etc. Like, I just, yeah, it's one of those things. It was just so disappointing and all that sort of stuff. I just wanted to like this movie, but yeah, it's come up short, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think knowing how it plays out now, I mean, I guess that that it was actually, that Sandy was responsible for that. I think when it was like in the library scene, when she's sort of going through it's nice to see people using libraries for research actually as well, working in a library service at the moment, using the microfiche and microfilms to go through the old newspaper reports and stuff. But you could see like flashes of like some of the men sort of popping up as missing, and that's when I kind of put it together. But they also had the red herring of Jack, what she believes turned Stamp to be. But I think that was too obvious, and I always knew that it was going to be a misread. Also, putting Sam Claflin in for like a 30-second cameo, that somebody's going to come back with that later on as well. So, but yeah, no, I'm keen to go back and rewatch it at some point, just to, now that I know what film it is. I think I might appreciate it more for what it is, as opposed to what I was expecting. I always often do that with films, someone like Prometheus, where you're expecting a straight alien prequel, and it turns out not to be. And I think if you go back and revisit it without your expectations, sometimes it could maybe throw up a few more interesting notes that I might be able to pick up on. But yeah, no, I think it's a 3-star for me at the moment, and I'm going to be interested to see how I revisit it. And but I am sad that I did not get the opportunity to see it in Soho. Although I googled Googe Place, where the bedsit is. Technically, it's in Fitzrovia. So I'm wondering why the film was not called Last Night in Fitzrovia. But I know that basically the film comes from a song called Last Night in Soho. So clearly there was not a song called Last Night in Fitzrovia.
It's one of those things I definitely think on our next trip to London, even though we're mixing this film, we will be
next London Film Festival, we have to go
sure.
to the Toucan.
Absolutely. First pints on me. But coming this week, it'll be an interesting one. With again, we're guided by what's coming out of the box office, which is always exciting. So we will have Spencer and Eternals, which are two very different movies. So two you've already seen. I've still to see the Eternals. So it seems to be a film that'll be creating a lot of controversy, etc. In terms of discourse. So I'll be looking forward to wading into that next week.
Oh, you've got to love wading into the discourse. Bring your wellies.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and yeah, go see a film in the dark, whether it's Last Night in Soho or Spencer or Harry Potter re-release. Go to the cinema and support them. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.